The desert went quiet in a way that made my skin tighten. Not peaceful, not calm. It was a kind of silence that feels intentional, like the land itself is watching to see who breaks first. Even the wind seemed to pull back. We were stretched out in a loose line, boots sinking into powdery sand, sweat running into our eyes and down our backs, when something inside me snapped to attention. Not fear, instinct. The kind that does not explain itself. I lifted my hand, and the women behind me froze instantly. No questions, no hesitation. Muscle memory took over because it had to. Then the air cracked. One shot, clean, controlled, not close enough to panic, not far enough to ignore. No follow-up, no shouting. Just that sharp sound, like a heavy door being closed somewhere we could not see. I scanned for movement and saw nothing. No enemy, no friendly face. Just my team still standing in the open when, by every rule of war, at least one of us should have been on the ground. Later, we called it luck. We called it discipline. We told ourselves we had done everything right. But I knew better. Someone had just stepped between us and death, and she did it without ever asking to be seen. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I was a staff sergeant then, long before that patrol rewired the way I think about survival. Before the deployment, I was stationed at Fort Drum in upstate New York. It was not a place people bragged about. It was cold most of the year, muddy the rest, and built around repetition. Long ruck marches through pine forests, endless drills in freezing rain. Days where your body begged you to stop, and the only lesson was how to keep moving anyway. Fort Drum did not make you fast or flashy. It made you stubborn, and sometimes that mattered more. By the time we rotated overseas in the spring of 2013, I had already learned a truth that followed me everywhere. The battlefield never announces itself. It never gives you a warning speech. It pretends to be ordinary until the exact second it is not. The danger is rarely loud at first. It is quiet, patient, waiting for you to relax. Our unit operated out of a small forward site that sat on the edge of nothing. No skyline, no busy roads. Just a handful of low buildings baked into the sand, a radio mast that hummed day and night, and desert in every direction. The kind of place that felt temporary even while you were living in it. We ran presence patrols and route confirmations, missions that sounded dull in a briefing room and felt heavy once you stepped outside the wire. Walking the same ground again and again does not make it safer. It just makes you more familiar with how exposed you are. That day, my patrol was 6 women. All trained, all competent. All carrying the kind of exhaustion that sleep does not touch. The kind that settles into your bones after months of heat, gear, and constant alertness. Kara Holloway led the patrol. People called her Reaper 16 on the radio, but in person she was quiet, sharp, and deliberate. She did not raise her voice. She did not waste words. When she made a decision, it was because she had already turned it over in her head twice. Tessa Riley moved point. She was built for scouting, always a half step ahead, eyes never still, reading the ground like a language most people never learned. Brooke Navarro was the newest among us, smart and capable, still learning that the desert lies constantly and that confidence has to be earned slowly out there. Lila Chen rarely spoke unless it mattered. She noticed patterns, changes, absences. The kind of soldier who could tell something was wrong without being able to explain why. Amber Brooks anchored us, steady and calm, the one whose voice stayed level even when tension started to climb. 6 women moving through a place that did not care if we came back. What we did not know was that there was a 7th presence that day. Someone who did not move when we moved. Someone who did not breathe when we breathed. We did not know her name. We did not know her face. We did not even know she existed, and that ignorance was not a failure. It was the point. Our mission was simple on paper. Confirm that an old compound was still empty, establish presence, and return without incident. Intelligence assessed the area as quiet. That word again. Quiet. Quiet. A word that sounds reassuring and means very little. Quiet often just means no one has been caught yet. As we stepped beyond the last friendly checkpoint, I felt the heat settle heavier than usual, like it was pressing down on my helmet and shoulders. Mirage shimmer bent the horizon until distance lost meaning. Things that looked close were far. Things that looked solid shifted when you stared too long. Sound traveled wrong. You could hear a pebble slide across rock a long way off, but a voice 10 feet away could disappear into the wind. The desert messes with your confidence. It makes you doubt your eyes, your ears, your judgment. It wears you down slowly and convinces you that normal is safe. That is how it wins. That is also why Overwatch exists. If you have never been protected by Overwatch, it is hard to explain what that feels like. You do not feel guarded, you feel exposed. You feel small under a massive sky, like there is nowhere to hide and no one watching your blind spots. You rely on your team, your spacing, your discipline, and the hope that nothing unexpected is already in motion. But looking back now, with years of distance, I understand something I could not have known then. We were never as alone as we felt. We were being watched by someone who had accepted the loneliest role in war, someone who lay still while others moved. Someone who carried water, time, and patience instead of recognition. Someone whose entire purpose depended on never being acknowledged. She stayed hidden so we could keep walking, and none of us had any idea how close we already were to dying. The first warning signs were so small I almost talked myself out of them. That is how it usually starts. Not with alarms or shouting, but with details that feel easy to ignore if you're tired enough. I noticed a set of tracks cutting across our route that did not match the direction of the wind. The edges were too sharp, too recent. A few steps later, there was a strip of cloth half buried in the sand. Not torn or weathered the way trash usually is, but clean, like it had been placed there and forgotten. Then a bird lifted off from a low ridge ahead of us, fast and early, not spooked by our movement, but by something else shifting closer. None of it was enough to call up the chain. None of it fit neatly into a report. It just sat in my chest, heavy and unresolved. Kara kept us moving, spacing clean, pace controlled. She did not rush, and she did not hesitate. Still, I could feel the tension creeping into the patrol. Shoulders tightened, hands adjusted grips more often than necessary. We had all been on patrols where nothing happened. Those are the ones that get people hurt if you let boredom take over. You start believing the silence means safety. Then we reached a shallow dip in the ground where a little shade gathered. An oasis in name only. No water worth trusting, just cooler sand and a brief break from the sun. It was the first place all day that invited us to slow down, to breathe, to let our guard slip just enough to feel human again. That is exactly what the enemy waits for. Brooke Navarro stepped slightly out of cover to adjust the strap on her pack. It was a small movement, careless only because it felt normal. I saw it at the same moment as Tessa Riley, a glint. Not a flash of light, not a reflection from random stone, a steady, unnatural line tucked into the rocks. The kind of shape your brain does not want to recognize right away. Like someone had been staring at us through glass, patient and already committed. I opened my mouth to shout, to warn Brooke, to break the moment before it broke us. The air cracked first. One shot. Clean. Controlled. Not close enough to tear past us. Not wild enough to be chance. It did not rip through our formation. It did not kick up sand at our feet. It did something else entirely. There was a sharp metallic snap in the distance. The wrong sound for a body hit. More like steel failing. Like a machine being rendered useless. Brooke dropped hard, training taking over, heart racing, eyes wide, waiting for the follow-up that every soldier expects after the first round. It never came. We scanned our sectors, muzzle steady, breathing loud in our ears. We waited for return fire. We waited for shouting. We waited for the desert to explode around us the way it usually does when you have been made. Nothing happened. No gunfight. No radio chatter. No dust plume of someone breaking contact and running. Just heat pressing down on us, and the sound of our own breathing, uneven and loud because adrenaline had nowhere to go. Seconds stretched, then minutes. I remember the way my thoughts started to unravel, not panic. Confusion. Because the situation did not make sense. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching us. And yet we were still alive, standing in the open, untouched. That is when a new kind of fear settled in. Not the fear of being attacked, the fear of not understanding the rules of the moment anymore. The fear that something had intervened, quietly and deliberately, and that we were moving through a fight we could not see. We pushed forward again, but everything about our movement changed. The pace slowed, spacing tightened and loosened with intention instead of habit. We used the ground the way you do when you know it will not save you, but you need to believe it might. In open desert, there is no real cover. There is only exposure managed carefully. You are always visible to someone. The only question is whether that someone chooses to act or to wait. The compound came into view through the heat shimmer. Low walls slumped inward, doors hanging crooked, rooms open to the sky. From a distance, it looked abandoned, forgotten by time. Up close, it felt staged. Too clean. Too quiet. Like a place meant to draw eyes forward while something else happened from the sides. Kara raised her fist and the patrol halted as one. No voices. No movement. Just breathing and the faint click of gear settling. That was when I noticed Lila Chen. Her rifle stayed steady, but her eyes kept lifting, not toward the compound like the rest of us, but upward, toward the ridgelines that framed the area. She did not point. She did not speak. She just watched, completely still, like she was listening to something the rest of us could not hear yet. Then it happened. Somewhere high above us, rock exploded. Not the sharp whine of a ricochet. Not the chaotic crack of a missed shot. This was deliberate. Precise. Stone shattered close enough for us to hear it clearly, close enough to send fragments skittering down the slope. It felt like a warning shot, but not meant for us. It felt like a message being delivered to someone else. For a moment, no one moved. Even the desert seemed to pause. Kara's jaw tightened, and she turned just enough to catch my eye. It was not a question she needed answered out loud. Her look said everything. Do you feel it too? Do you think what I think? I did. We were being watched. Either by an enemy who had us under observation and had not yet chosen the moment to strike, or by someone else entirely, someone who had already decided that we were not going to die there. Both possibilities carried weight. Both were dangerous in their own way. If it was enemy surveillance, then every step forward brought us closer to a trap that was already set. The kind of trap that waited for spacing to relax and attention to narrow. The kind that turned routine patrols into names carved into temporary markers. And if it was friendly Overwatch, then the implication was just as heavy. Because nobody assigns Overwatch like that unless the threat is real. You do not place a ghost in the high ground unless there is something worth killing from a distance. Something close enough, patient enough, and organized enough to wipe out a patrol in seconds. Kara made a decision that would never appear in an after-action review as anything more than a footnote. She shifted our approach angle, taking us wider around the compound instead of straight in. It meant more distance, more exposure, more time under the sun. It meant burning water we could not easily replace and pushing fatigue deeper into our legs. It also meant breaking whatever picture someone had drawn of our movement. She did not explain the call. She did not need to. Leadership at that level is not about speeches. It is about choosing the least bad option when none of them feel safe. We adjusted silently and moved. As we walked, I could feel the weight of being observed pressing down on me. Not in a threatening way, but in a sobering one. Like realizing you are standing on a stage you did not know existed, with eyes on you from places you cannot see. Every step after that felt measured, deliberate. The desert no longer felt empty. It felt crowded with unseen decisions. At the time, all I knew was that something had changed, and that Kara's choice felt right in a way that was hard to justify but impossible to ignore. I did not know yet how much that decision would cost someone else. And I did not know yet how much it would save us. The wind came up without warning, the way it always does when the desert decides it has had enough of pretending to be manageable. One moment the sky was washed out blue, harsh but familiar. The next, it darkened into a sickly brown haze that swallowed contrast and depth. Sand lifted off the ground and slammed into us from every direction, stinging our necks, wrists, and faces, finding its way into every seam of gear, no matter how tight you thought it was sealed. Visibility collapsed so fast it felt like the world was being erased in front of us. Landmarks vanished. The horizon dissolved. The compound we had been skirting faded into nothing but shadow and motion. It was disorienting in a way that made your stomach drop, like losing balance while standing still. Radio started popping with static, voices breaking apart mid-sentence. GPS units drifted and stuttered, confidence turning into guesswork. Nothing worked the way it was supposed to once the storm took over. Technology is useful until the environment decides it is not. Kara did not hesitate. She gave the hand signal, and we tightened up immediately, closing distance, linking together by touch and trust. Each of us took hold of the next, gloved hands gripping sleeves or packs, moving as one connected shape instead of 6 separate bodies. It was the only way to keep from losing someone when you could barely see your own boots. The storm roared so loud it drowned out everything else. Your own breathing sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Every sense narrowed down to feel and instinct. That was when it happened. 3 sharp cracks cut through the noise, spaced evenly, precise enough to be unmistakable. The rounds struck the sand ahead of us, close enough to see bursts of dust even through the storm. Not random, not panicked. A pattern. Kara stopped instantly, her arms snapping up, the patrol freezing in place. I stopped with her, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might knock the air out of my chest. In that single suspended moment, something clicked in my head. No enemy fires like that in a storm. Not without a target. Not without trying to kill someone. Ammunition is not wasted that way. Not by anyone who knows what they are doing. Those shots were not meant to take a life. They were meant to guide one. They were meant to steer us. The realization hit me so fast it felt physical. The spacing. The direction of the impacts. The angle. Someone was drawing a line in the sand and telling us, without words, that crossing it would get us killed. I did not ask for confirmation. I did not wait for Kara to speak. There was no time for debate or hesitation, not with visibility dropping by the second and the storm masking everything that mattered. I leaned in close enough that she could hear me over the wind and shouted the only thing that mattered. Change direction. Now, Kara did not question it. She did not demand justification. She trusted the urgency in my voice and the years we had spent moving together under pressure. She signaled the pivot, and the entire patrol shifted as one, angling away from the shallow depression we had been drifting toward without realizing it. We moved fast, feet sinking and sliding, muscles burning as we fought the wind. Every step felt wrong, like we were breaking some invisible rule, but instinct screamed that staying the course would be worse. Seconds stretched. Then minutes. Through the brown chaos behind us, shapes began to move. Slow, close, controlled, not the scattered movement of locals caught in weather. Not the panicked scramble of people seeking shelter. This was deliberate predatory motion. The kind you only see when someone is already within killing distance and closing the last gap quietly. They were right where we would have been. I felt cold despite the heat, the kind of cold that starts in your spine and spreads outward when you realize how close you came to being erased. If we had stayed on our original path, we would have walked straight into a ring of rifles at point-blank range, trapped by terrain and visibility, overwhelmed before anyone could react. There would have been no fight worth remembering, just noise, confusion, and loss. Instead, we kept moving. The storm swallowed the shapes behind us, and they never closed the distance. Whether they broke contact or never fully understood why their trap failed, I will never know. All I know is that we put space between ourselves and death, one decision at a time. When the adrenaline finally caught up with me, relief hit hard enough to make my hands shake. We were still together. No one was missing. No one was bleeding. We had lived. And even in that moment of relief, the weight of understanding settled in. Those warning shots had not been free. Whoever fired them had exposed herself, even if only for seconds. She had broken the one rule that kept her safe. She had revealed just enough of her presence to save us, knowing that doing so increased the risk to her own life. She had traded a piece of her invisibility for our survival, and there was something deeply unsettling about that. Because it meant that while we were moving, reacting, surviving in the storm, someone else was making a quieter calculation, one that did not include applause, recognition, or backup. She chose us over herself, and we never even saw her face. We dropped into a shallow cut in the terrain and held there, bodies pressed low, weapons braced into sand that felt more like powder than ground. Faces were wrapped tight, goggles smeared, eyes burning from grit that found its way in anyway. The storm screamed over us, a constant violent roar that swallowed every other sound, and that made the fear worse. Noise you can fight against. Silence you can listen through. But this was neither. It was chaos without gaps. Every gust felt like it might peel us apart. We stayed still because movement was a gamble. You move in that kind of storm, you lose orientation, you lose spacing, you lose someone. So we stayed crouched and waited, counting breaths, hands locked on rifles, muscles trembling from the effort of not reacting. Then, in the brief pause between gusts, I heard it. One shot, far off. Clean, final. It cut through the storm, just long enough to register, then disappeared again like it had never existed. No burst followed. No frantic exchange, no shouting. Just that single sound, placed exactly where it needed to be. It did not sound like a firefight. It sounded like a decision. Every part of me went rigid. I scanned blindly into the brown nothing, knowing it was useless but unable to stop myself. My mind raced ahead to the follow-up, the return fire, the moment when everything would erupt. It never did. We waited. Seconds stretched until they felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. We listened for movement, for boots crunching closer, for voices raised over the wind. We listened for anything that meant the storm had given someone cover to close in on us. The storm carried everything away. The pressure in my chest built until it felt like breathing through a weight. My hands shook, not from cold, but from adrenaline with nowhere to go. There was no release, no action to burn it off. We had not charged. We had not fired. We had not fired. We had not done anything you could point to later and call brave. We were just trying not to die in a storm. And yet, beneath the fear and the strain, I could feel something else, a steady certainty that did not come from inside our little huddled group. Someone else was still working. Someone else was still tracking movement we could not see, timing shots we could not hear clearly, making choices in a place where hesitation meant failure. Someone who could not come down to check on us. Someone who could not crawl over and whisper that it was clear. Someone who could not call out, "You are safe now," because safety for her depended on silence. If she broke that silence, even once, it could cost her everything. Her position, her life. the protection she was providing not just to us, but to everyone who would walk this ground after us. So we stayed where we were, trusting a presence we could not confirm. Holding our sectors, counting heartbeats, letting the storm exhaust itself around us. Little by little, the wind lost its edge. The brown haze thinned. Shapes started to return to the world, faint and distorted at first, like a photograph developing in a tray. The ridgeline reappeared in pieces. The slope behind us came back into focus. The desert looked exactly the way it had before, smooth and empty and indifferent, as if nothing had happened at all. That was the lie. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that the desert had been crowded moments earlier, that people had been close enough to hear us breathe, close enough to smell sweat and oil and dust on our gear, close enough that one wrong step would have ended everything. When we finally moved again, it was slow and careful. No one spoke. No one needed to. We did not fan out or push forward aggressively. We just put space between ourselves and where we had been, knowing better than to assume the danger was gone. As we walked, my thoughts kept circling back to that single shot. The restraint it took to fire only once. The confidence it took to know one was enough. The discipline required to solve a problem permanently without turning it into noise. Whoever she was, she had not panicked, she had not rushed. She had waited for the exact moment when action mattered, and then acted once, decisively, knowing that anything more would only increase the risk. That kind of control does not come from talent alone. It comes from experience, from hours spent watching without being seen, from accepting that you may never be acknowledged for what you do, because acknowledgement would undo the work itself. As the storm faded completely and the desert returned to its quiet, familiar cruelty, one truth settled over me heavier than the sand in my gear. We were only alive because somewhere above us, in conditions just as bad or worse, a woman we would never meet had stayed calm when everything went brown. She had stayed steady so we could keep moving. And the desert, for all its indifference, had briefly been forced to allow it. At first light, the desert gave us just enough visibility to understand how close we had come without ever explaining why we survived. The storm had erased most of the night, smoothing the sand back into something that looked untouched. But not everything listens to the wind the way it should. We found tracks circling the shallow depression we had been drifting toward before the warning shots. Not random movement. Intentional. A loose ring that closed inward, exactly where our original route would have taken us. The spacing told the story clearly enough. This was not observation. This was preparation. A few yards farther on, Tessa knelt and brushed sand away with careful fingers. Spent casings lay half-buried, angled just enough to show they had been fired from positions chosen in advance. Someone had taken time here. Someone had waited. Then we found the firing position. It was tucked behind a low rock formation that owned the approach. From there you could see the entire route we would have walked. You could control it. You could end it. If we had stayed on course, that spot alone could have broken us before anyone understood what was happening. And farther out, away from the obvious points of contact, there was something else. A place where the sand was disturbed in a way that did not look like weather. No scuff marks. No dragging lines. Just a subtle difference in texture and compression, like a body had been there long enough to matter and careful enough to leave without a trail. Like someone had risen, gathered themselves, and moved on with purpose. We did not linger. Curiosity gets people killed just as fast as complacency. Once the light was good enough, we cleared the compound the way we were trained to, room by room, angle by angle, expecting resistance that never came. It was empty, just as intelligence had predicted. No weapons cache, no fighters hiding in corners. No dramatic reveal, just dust, old cooking fires burned down to nothing, and walls that held stories we did not have the clearance or the time to uncover. It was the kind of place that existed only to draw attention while the real work happened somewhere else. On paper, it was a clean mission. Confirmed. Completed. Zero contact. But paper does not hear gunshots. Paper does not feel the weight of moments that never turn into casualties. As we moved back toward friendly lines, my mind kept replaying the sounds from the day and night before. Not as noise, but as intent. The first shot that shattered metal instead of tearing through a body. A choice to disable instead of kill. A decision that carried restraint and confidence. The second shot that split rock high on the ridge, not random, not careless. A warning aimed outward, meant to be understood by someone who knew what it meant. The three patterned shots in the storm, spaced and placed to redirect us away from a death trap we could not see. And the final single shot in the darkness. Clean, controlled. Final, in a way that left no room for follow-up. Those were not accidents. They were deliberate acts, executed by someone who understood consequences better than most people ever have to. Each shot carried risk. Each decision increased the chance of being discovered. Each moment demanded a calculation that balanced our lives against her own safety. As we walked, no one spoke for a long time. Boots moved through sand that now looked harmless, almost gentle in the early light. The desert has a way of pretending nothing happened once it gets what it wanted. It was Lila Chen who finally broke the silence. Her voice was calm, almost thoughtful, like she was stating something obvious that had simply taken time to surface. "Whoever it is," she said, not looking at any of us directly, "she stays unknown because being known makes her a target." No one argued. No one laughed it off. No one tried to fill the space with bravado. Because, deep down, we all understood the truth in that sentence. If we ever met her, it would mean something had gone wrong. It would mean she had been forced to reveal herself. It would mean her protection had failed, even if we survived it. Her success depended on our ignorance, and that realization sat heavy with me as we crossed back into friendly territory. We had trained for contact, for firefights, for loss. We had prepared ourselves to face enemies we could see. None of us had trained for the weight of owing our lives to someone who would never step forward to claim them. As the base came into view, and the familiar shapes of barriers and towers replaced the open desert, one thought stayed with me, sharper than anything else. We would return to routine, to briefings, to patrols, to the noise of everyday war. And somewhere out there, a woman would shoulder her pack, settle into another position, and disappear again. Not because she wanted to be forgotten, but because forgetting her was the price of staying alive. Back at base, Kara wrote the report the only way it could be written if everyone involved wanted to keep breathing. Facts only. Times. Locations. Weather. Movement. Zero contact. Mission complete. She stripped it of anything that sounded like intuition or interpretation. No mention of warning shots. No mention of altered routes. No speculation about unseen help. Paper has rules, and breaking them can get people noticed for the wrong reasons. Later that night, after gear was stowed and the noise of the day had settled into something manageable, Kara pulled me aside near the edge of the motor pool where the lights did not quite reach. It was not dramatic. Just two leaders standing shoulder to shoulder, staring out at nothing in particular. "Did you feel it too?" she asked quietly. She did not need to explain what she meant. I nodded. Not fear, not adrenaline. Presence. The sense that someone had been there the entire time, watching angles we could not see, weighing decisions we would never be part of. The feeling did not fade after the patrol. If anything, it sharpened. Like once you realize something exists, you cannot unknow it. Days turned into weeks. Missions stacked up the way they always do. Different routes. Different objectives. Same desert. Same heat, same lies. On the surface, we went back to normal. Briefings. Checks. Movement. return, repeat. But something had changed in us. We moved sharper, even on days that felt routine. We scanned ridgelines longer, not because we expected contact, but because we understood how much ground could be owned by someone patient enough to hold it. We spoke less on patrol, not out of fear, but out of respect. Silence stopped being something to fill with jokes or noise. It became something to protect. Not because we were scared of the enemy, because we had gained an understanding of what it costs to keep people alive without letting them rely on you. There is a difference between support you can see and support that must remain invisible. The first builds confidence. The second builds responsibility. Once you know someone is out there risking everything so you can walk, you feel a different weight on your shoulders. You stop taking steps lightly. A few weeks later, word came down that intelligence wanted a debrief. Not a formal one, no room full of rank. Just a quiet conversation, the kind that feels optional but is not. Captain Lauren Brennan met me in a small office with no windows and a desk that looked like it had been there longer than either of us. She was calm, composed, and observant in a way that made you feel seen without feeling judged. She did not start with questions. She let the silence stretch until it became clear she was listening before I even spoke. She did not mock us. She did not smile in disbelief or brush off what could not be proven. She asked about timing, about spacing, about angles, about decisions that felt instinctive but carried measurable consequences. Her questions were precise in a way that told me she already understood the outline of the answer. She just needed to confirm the edges. When I finished, she sat quietly for a long moment, pen still, eyes unfocused like she was looking through the wall behind me. Then she spoke, carefully, as if each word carried weight beyond the room. Some capabilities, she said, are not meant to be spoken about in daylight. She did not explain further. She did not need to. She gathered the notes, thanked me for my time, and filed the report upward, not sideways. Not back down, up. Past where I could follow. Past where questions could be asked safely. After that, the paper trail disappeared. That was when I knew, without doubt, that we had not imagined any of it. We had not filled gaps with superstition or fear. What protected us was real enough to be hidden on purpose. Somewhere beyond our line of sight, beyond our clearance, a woman was still doing her job. Watching. Waiting, choosing when to act and when to remain, nothing more than a shadow. She would never step forward and say it was her. She would never allow herself to be thanked, because gratitude requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement creates vulnerability. The strange part was not that we never met her. The strange part was learning to live with the fact that we never should. There are people in war whose success depends entirely on being unknown. Their victories are measured not in enemy dead, but in patrols that come back whole, in reports that sound boring, in days that end without ceremony. She was one of those people, and every time we walked out after that, every time boots crossed the wire and returned with the same count, I felt it again. That quiet awareness, that somewhere, someone was carrying a burden we were not allowed to share. Not because she did not trust us, but because protecting us meant staying alone. And that, more than any firefighter medal, taught me what real sacrifice looks like. I train younger soldiers now. Not in the desert anymore, mostly on cold mornings, on quiet ranges, in places that look ordinary until you remember what those skills are meant to protect. Gravel under boots, frost in the air, targets that do not shoot back. It all feels simple until you know how quickly simple turns into something else. I teach them the standard things first: water discipline, scanning sectors until their necks ache, spacing that feels excessive until it is not, patience, because rushing almost always costs more than waiting. Those lessons are written into manuals and drilled into muscle memory. Then there are the lessons that do not have a checklist. I tell them that sometimes the person who saves your life will never step into your circle. She will never pose for a photograph or stand on a stage while someone pins metal to her chest. She will never hear her name spoken out loud. Because the moment she is recognized, the moment she becomes known, she also becomes easier to find, and being found would undo everything she protects. I did not know Master Sergeant Evelyn Hart's name when it mattered. I learned it later, in fragments and quiet conversations, after enough time had passed that the truth could exist without endangering her. And even then, I kept my mouth shut, because her legacy was never meant to be a story with a face. Her legacy is counted in returns, in patrols that come back whole, in chairs that are not left empty, in families that never receive a knock on the door. When I think about that patrol now, I do not picture gunfire or chaos. I picture a woman alone on a ridge, pressed into rock and sand, choosing to disappear so others could keep their names, their futures, their lives. I hope she knows this, even if she never hears it spoken. We came home because she stayed hidden. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.